Hey everyone, welcome to Tech Tuesday. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about broadband news, kind of curated for those of you that are broadband providers. I'll be right back. Hey, thanks for joining me. I'm Rick Uzzi here with Zcorum, and again today I'm going to be talking about some of the latest stories that I've seen in broadband news. We'll go through those. I'll kind of try to group those in a way that makes sense and maybe have a little commentary on those. Feel free to, if you have any comments or questions, just pop in there in the chat in YouTube. So let's get started. Let's see what's going on today. So first off, this is something that I think we've seen happening for some period of time now. This is pay TV losses to get worse over the next few years. This is from a study from S&P Global Projects. The trend of cord cutting could have a negative impact on the TV sector's credit quality. Maybe. So yeah, this is something that we've seen happening where your traditional pay TV providers like cable operators and phone companies that are providing pay TV, and of course satellite companies like Dish and DirecTV, they've been losing lots of video subscribers. Not something not something new. There was a little bit of a back off on that with the pandemic as people were at home, stuck at home, and maybe did not cut the cord as much because of that. But we see here it says the cable sector is projected to see a loss of 6.6% of its subscriptions in 2021, which is up from 4.6% in 2020. Larger cable operators are seeing a 2-point increase from 3.8 to 5.8% year over year. And then it says mid-size, which would be like 9 to 10%, and small operators actually seeing a marginally smaller rate of loss from 10.8 to 10.5 will not move the needle as much. So those larger operators are really going to be what's going to be making those numbers turn south. So all those numbers are expected to remain steady in 2022 or into 2022. S&P believes this increased pace is likely to continue because the cable sector is increasingly indifferent as to whether unprofitable customers get their video service from cable companies or a third-party service. So that's really interesting, and this is also something that we've seen a trend here that cable operators and telephone companies maybe providing pay TV are less interested in holding on to those pay TV customers because of the costs involved. The technology costs are high, the programming costs are very high, and they keep going up. And then there's very little leeway on how pay TV operators can offer their pay TV packages. A lot of times if you want to offer particular channels, you've got to bundle them together. You can't put certain channels in certain tiers. So it's been very difficult. So like they're saying here, some of these pay TV operators might be just as well happy to lose some of these because that, in a sense, is their only business. Satellite's rate of losses are expected to decrease, according to S&P, having been at 11.2% in 2020. And a projection of 10.1% in 2021 and 10% in 2022. That's really surprising. I don't know why they're expecting that to go down. It credits Dish's focus on key rural subscribers. But that says here, but S&P questions the long-term sustainability of this trend. And I would question that as well, especially with rural subscribers. As more rural operators get, or as more rural subscribers get higher and higher broadband speeds, they can then start looking at streaming video, where maybe the only option they had was satellite for their video, maybe the only good option they have, or one of several, one of a couple. Then now they can get over the top where they couldn't do that before. DirecTV, meanwhile, which plays in more urban and suburban markets, has not leveled off as S&P had originally thought it might, maintaining its 15% pace of subscriber loss. Of course, there's a question about both of these companies. AT&T has, they've basically taken DirecTV and put it in a subsidiary of sorts so that it doesn't hit their books as much, and there's talk about a DirecTV and a Dish merger at some point, but there's questions as to whether that'll happen. So the whole satellite video thing is a big question mark right now. Then there's telco. Despite several telcos offering cloud-based TV services, S&P estimates that its rate of subscriber losses will jump from 13.7% in 2021 to more than 38% in 2022. And again here, as many companies could be content to let their video customers churn over the next few years. So just like I said before, it may be that they're just going to let these customers cancel their service, not try really hard to save them. So it's not going to be one of those things where you call your cable or your pay TV operator and say, hey, I'm going to cancel, hoping that they're going to maybe lower your price and let you stay. There's not much room for them to lower price anymore, and they don't care as much about you anymore because you're just not as profitable on the video side. So one bright spot for pay TV in recent years was the virtual pay TV entrants like YouTube TV and Sling TV, and those are they look very much like cable or pay TV kind of program choices, where you've got a guide and you've got a long list of programs that you can watch live, including local TV. But it says here they're growing to become more like traditional pay TV packages, and the prices are starting to rise in reflection of that. So they have the same challenges that the cable TV operators have had. There's a little bit less in the way of equipment, and there's a lot of times there's not contracts, so they can maybe get subscribers easily. But it says here these services should be able to continue growing over the next few years. However, because they do not require any equipment fees or contracts, that's why they would grow, but they do have a greater monthly churn, and their revenue streams are more volatile because of this. So people can sign up, and then they can cancel, and then sign up with something else. They can move around a lot easier than it has traditionally been with traditional pay TV, where you sign up maybe as a new customer, and you've got a 1 or 2 year contract, and you've got equipment fees in there, and those kinds of things that the pay TV operator is trying to recover. Pay TV's decline could accelerate if sports make a stronger push towards streaming. That's a big reason that people are holding on to their current pay TV packages, is because of sports, live sports, as well as local programming. So as maybe more live sports hit other avenues like an over-the-top provider or some of these others, then you'll see maybe some additional people cutting the cord because of that. But again, local TV is a big factor in people keeping the pay TV that they have. Also, the expansion of broadband into more rural areas will help make streaming options more viable for those markets, also contributing to greater adoption of streaming services. So as I mentioned before, in rural areas you may see more cord cutting in the future, because as they get higher broadband packages, then they may feel that they can then cut the pay TV package and start streaming over the top. But maybe those rural providers won't mind as much either. They'll continue to provide the broadband service. You still need a good broadband connection to stream, and they won't have those high costs of traditional pay TV service. Now there are options. There's options like we have with our SFN TV Now product that are, it's a virtual IPTV product, has a lot of the same cost savings that you would have with, with a traditional IPTV product that's not your traditional cable or pay TV product. Less expensive, so those are still an option for pay TV providers if they want to stay in that business. Biden's broadband plan signals an end of hands-off regulation era. So, the Biden administration has put forward, and they're floating this huge infrastructure bill, much of which is not infrastructure at all. It's like 2 to 3 trillion, maybe closing in on 3 trillion. There's 100 billion of that would be broadband. Some of that would be infrastructure. Some of that would be helping to promote broadband adoption. So there's a lot in that bill, but not many details. And some of what's in there is they want to it looks like they might be regulating more or getting the government more involved in the broadband business. Since telecom reforms began in the mid-'80s with the breakup of the old AT&T, it's been big telecom that has driven the industry, constrained by no more than light touch regulation. That's been kind of what has been done. There was a period there where the Obama administration put in the net neutrality regulations, and then the Trump administration repealed that. And we'll wait and see whether the Biden administration puts that back. But in this broadband plan that they put forward, there's one of the things that they want to do is promote municipal broadband and broadband from electric utilities like electric co-ops, which could mean some regulation moving forward as well. As USA Today explains, the problem with U.S. broadband networks have been obvious for years. Service costs more than in many other rich nations. It still doesn't reach tens of millions of Americans, and the companies that provide it don't face much competition. And that really obviously depends on where you are. There's huge amounts of broadband and competition in various markets, and lots of markets actually. But there's still those rural areas where there may be only one provider, maybe not even any really good provider, where they're having to use satellite broadband, and the old kind of satellite broadband that, it's just very expensive to get broadband in those areas. But here it says, Other major economies are already on this path. The EU has allocated a fifth of its 672 billion euros, or $801 billion, COVID-19 Reconstruction Fund to digital connectivity, in particular to fiber and 5G. In the last decade, Singapore and Australia have both rolled out government-funded next-gen broadband networks. And I mentioned Singapore. The Singapore project is an unqualified success. It ranks #1 in world broadband rankings. But if you look at Singapore, this small island, compared to the United States, this diverse country that's got all kinds of territories from very urban, dense populations to very remote rural populations, there's no comparison there. So you can't really compare the success rate as well as pricing and those kinds of things. It's going to be a lot more expensive to deliver broadband in rural areas than it would be in a highly dense island, for example. Regulators in other successful Asian broadband markets, such as Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, have always been more hands-on. So again, those particular areas are going to be easier to reach with broadband because the populations tend to be more clustered together. And then also, those particular governments have always been more hands-on anyway. And that would be a big change for the United States to have a lot of government intervention in certain private businesses. But that's what they're looking at doing. Here you see from PC Magazine, they're talking about municipal ISPs being blocked from providing cheaper broadband in 18 states. So what the new Biden bill wants to do is remove any of those restrictions, and there are restrictions, and a lot of times those restrictions are from lobbying from the large service providers, your large MSOs, your large telephone companies. This year, 4 states have passed legislation to remove bans on local governments providing inexpensive internet, but 18 states still face barriers. And you can see here on this map, your green states are those that have no restrictions or roadblocks, so it's really wide open for municipalities. Then you've got your yellow, which is, I've got some roadblocks, and then you've got explicit restrictions in these red states. So certain states, you just can't do municipal broadband because of state regulations. So the Biden infrastructure plan, the broadband portion of that, will likely have some kind of proposal for regulations or rules or laws that would make it, let's say, where a state or a city or a county or whoever cannot restrict municipal broadband. So that would probably be their goal. Rather than leaving broadband in the hands of corporations who put their bottom line ahead of people, there's a possibility of potentially less costly broadband provided by municipal governments, but laws in many states stand in the way of consumers receiving cheaper community-provided broadband. One of the reasons for that, I mean, there are some good reasons for that, because if there's already good broadband in a particular area, and a municipality gets involved with that, which is going to be funded by taxpayers, it's going to have lower cost because of that, because a lot of that money is coming from taxpayers. They don't have to charge as much for the service. That, therefore, is very difficult competitive-wise for any private companies that want to provide broadband, because they don't have taxpayer money coming in. So that's one of the reasons for those laws, in addition to that lobbying. While last year 22 states did not allow for municipal broadband, this year the number is down to 18, so it's dropped this year, probably because of the pandemic. A lot of emphasis on that. Arkansas, Idaho, Tennessee, and Washington have all passed bills that remove restrictions. Montana attempted legislation, but it failed early in the legislative session. There are stated bills in Tennessee and Idaho, and then Washington is working on HB 1336 for public entities to provide broadband directly to residents. So this is part of that. This is going to be a push with the Biden infrastructure plan that we'll see. And the other thing that's in that plan that, again, there's not a lot of details, but Biden talks about removing subsidies, which is probably referring to things like USF funds, which he says would be kind of continuing subsidies for providing low-speed internet, not really providing a lot of incentive, and still prices too high. He's talked about lowering the prices for consumers and not doing that through subsidies, which means that the internet service providers would be bearing the cost of that. And it might look like what they did here in New York. Here, New York mandates a $15 low-income broadband service. So the state of New York has mandated that broadband service providers offer a $15 broadband service tier to low-income households. Service providers have 60 days to comply. They must offer at least 25 megabits per second, which that's on the download speed. That is the FCC's current minimum definition for broadband. Additionally, a 100 megabit per second tier can be offered for $20. To be eligible for these discounts, they have to be eligible for discounted school lunches or food stamps. So they have to qualify for some low-income services to get that. There's a provision in the legislation that exempts smaller broadband carriers who serve 20,000 households or less who can demonstrate financial hardship from this mandate. So if you're a smaller operator, 20,000 or less, this would not apply to you. It doesn't appear to offer any supplements or subsidies to carriers who provide the $15 broadband service. So this is an unfunded mandate that's being forced upon these ISPs that they have to provide the service at that charge. So I don't know how that's going to fly. Governor Andrew Cuomo threatened to ban companies from New York if they don't comply with the $15 broadband service mandate. And he said, "To these internet companies, I say again, you don't operate in the state of New York by an act of God. You operate in the state of New York by the will of the people. If you do not do this, you will lose your franchise in the state of New York, and that's a promise." So he's threatening them there. And it says down here, it makes you wonder how many other states may follow New York's lead with broadband service mandates for low-income households. And the other thing it makes you wonder is, what does this mean as far as, again, what Biden is going to put forward? But again, I don't see how that's going to fly, because I don't see how the government can mandate a private company and dictate their prices. This is not like the Public Service Commission in a state dictating what a public utility can charge for their services. So I would expect lots of court fights on this, especially depending on where this service is located, because the cost to provide a $15 service in the middle of New York versus in a rural area where you've only got one customer per mile, or maybe only a couple of customers per mile or less, it's going to be much, much different as far as the cost to that operator, especially if there's no subsidies, if they take away USF or something like that. And how many people can access low-priced broadband? Well, it depends on what low price means. Is it $15? It says 77% of Americans can access low-priced broadband, according to this report, but that's not $15. More than 77% of Americans now have access to low-priced wireline broadband service plans, marking a significant jump over the 50% who had access to those plans 1 year ago. So that's good as far as the trend is looking good. This is according to the new Broadband Now research report. Most recent figure also represents a climb from 70% in the fourth quarter of 2020. So a lot of headway has been made last year, and especially the end part of the year, probably again due to the pandemic and pressures for providers to try to make that service affordable to people. Now, I don't know if that's taking into account any temporary reductions in price that were made as far as the pandemic, as people had lost their jobs. A lot of service providers were stepping up and providing lower costs, maybe. So we'll see if that's permanent or not. The qualifiers for low price plans are that they need to cost $60 or less per month. So that's a big difference between $15 and $60. Excluding any promotional pricing, so it does say exclude promotional pricing. It doesn't necessarily say about temporary efforts because of the pandemic. And deliver minimum speeds of 25 by 3, which again, that's the definition right there for broadband from the FCC. The research indicated that only 31% of Americans have access to low-price plans that serve at least 100 megabits per downstream and 25 up. About 41% of Americans have access to symmetrical services, 100 megabits download and 100 megabits upload. So that's another little tidbit from this report. A few other things that came out of it. Symmetrical services may be found lacking, and you see that a lot because cable broadband is has by far the most number of broadband customers, and cable broadband, we'll see in a minute that's changing, but cable broadband has traditionally not been a duplex service, so you've got higher download speeds and lower upload speeds. But we've also seen in the last year that upload speeds, or certainly upload capacity, is important as more people are doing Zoom calls, streaming like I'm doing right now, that kind of thing. There are also wide discrepancies in latency. And you can see that having changed also with the pandemic as networks had gotten more congestion, maybe latency had gone up. 21 states across the U.S. saw overall improvements in latency between the fourth quarter last year and the first quarter this year, but 24 states recorded an overall decline in latency performance. 8 states saw no change. So interesting there. Now, the Republicans have put forward their own proposal, their own infrastructure proposal, which includes $65 billion for broadband compared to the $100 billion that is in the Biden plan. And I guess Republicans don't have a whole lot of power right now in Congress, so but they do have some leverage on maybe negotiating a little bit between this plan and the Biden plan. 4 Republican senators released a proposed framework for legislation that would allocate $65 billion as part of a total $568 billion package. It also would include money for roads, bridges, public transit, drinking water, airports, and more. So the Biden plan somewhere close to $3 trillion, and this plan a little bit over $500 billion, so $568 billion. So quite a bit less. The broadband is a little bit over 50% what the Democrats have put forward. This was from Pat Toomey, Shelley Moore, Capito, Roger Wicker, and Jonah Barrasso. Those are the senators that sponsored that. The framework did not detail how the Republicans proposed to allocate broadband funding, other than noting that funding would be dispersed over a 5-year period. So that amount of money would be over 5 years, but they don't give any details at all as to what that would go for. They say it rebuilds the nation's real infrastructure without raising taxes or increasing the debt. So what the Biden plan does is they plan on significantly increasing corporate taxes to pay for their plan, and I don't know if that would actually cover it. But let's remember that when you raise corporate taxes, corporations don't actually pay taxes. People pay taxes. So when you raise corporate taxes, that hits every one of us, because it may be that they hire fewer people because their taxes go up. It may be that they have to lower wages or don't raise people's pay. Maybe their dividends go down. So everybody pays for higher corporate taxes except the corporation. So that's a hidden tax. Let's not forget that. According to a report by Multichannel News, the $65 billion that the Republicans proposed to spend on broadband would come from the proceeds in the recent C-band spectrum auction. That auction raised $81 billion. So when the FCC auctioned off C-band spectrum for new 5G mid-band spectrum, that raised $81 billion. So they would take $65 billion of that and put that towards this infrastructure plan. So that would be money that doesn't come from taxes, doesn't increase the debt. So that's their plan there. And the rest of that, what they have to do with some of that money is they have to pay the satellite companies that are vacating the lower portion of that band in order to allow for 5G service in there. So that's an interesting plan from them. Democrats have proposed raising corporate taxes to cover their infrastructure proposal. What remains to be seen now is whether Democrats and Republicans will be able to agree on compromise legislation. That's always a challenge. And as I said, the Republicans don't have a whole lot of power right now. So if they can't get any Democrats on board with what they're trying to do, as it says here, with Democrats controlling the House of Representatives and virtually controlling the Senate, they may have the option of simply pushing their legislation through with little or no Republican support. Let's see. So one of the things that the FCC has been tasked to do, and this was part of prior legislation, is they have to improve the mapping that shows where people have broadband, because it's not very accurate right now. The mapping comes from whether or not there is a single subscriber in a particular area that has access to the minimum broadband requirements. So if you've just got one subscriber in an area and the operator reports that, then that's considered a served area. They're trying to change that, and they also want to have these maps reflect more real-world kinds of speeds. So they're wanting end users to report these speeds, which is a good idea in theory, but I don't know how it's going to work the way they're doing this. So the way that they want to do this is through an app. So the FCC promotes its Speed app as helping gauge truly available broadband. The FCC is trying to collect more accurate data on broadband availability so it can produce more accurate maps to help guide the billions of dollars it will regularly hands out in broadband deployment subsidies, and the billions more it will be handing out under COVID-19 aid packages. And there's a lot of money that's going out. So they want to make sure that if an area is considered unserved or underserved, that information is accurate. And they want to do it through this app where people self-report, basically. Could also help guide the Biden administration's apparent new focus on the definition of broadband availability, which includes not just where service is available, but whether it is fast enough and affordable enough. The test will help the FCC determine where broadband is truly available. But again, with this being an app, and I went ahead and pulled it up on Google Play, the way that they're the way that this app is going to work is not really going to, in my opinion, tell them a whole lot. It will tell them a good amount about maybe mobile broadband speeds, because when you're out of your house and you go and report your speeds, it will report what your service is in that particular area at that particular time over the mobile broadband network. So there's nothing in between you and the service that you're getting, in a sense. But let's see, it says here what it does. Accurately measure the performance of your mobile broadband service by running active tests to evaluate the following metrics: download and upload speed, latency, jitter, and packet loss. And then it says you can run these tests over both Wi-Fi and cellular connections, but that's the problem, right? So if you're at home and you're running this, you've got this app and you say, I want to know what my broadband speed is. Well, where are you standing in your home? Are you next to your router, your Wi-Fi router? Are you out in the backyard? Are you in a room, where normally you don't get good service? And it's going to record that as, poor service, basically. Once you install and open the app, periodic automatic background tests will be scheduled. So this is going to automatically be testing your broadband without you having to do anything. You can set a monthly data cap to ensure tests do not go over your limit. You can also monitor data usage. So that is important, because every time you're doing a speed test, basically the way those work is that you do a download and an upload of data, just a bunch of data to see how fast things happen. So you want to make sure that doesn't get you over your limits. It's easy to do, but again, the problem is Wi-Fi. That's one of the issues that people have with their home networks, is it's over Wi-Fi. It could get congested. They could be in a bad spot in the home. And I don't know how you are going to make any kinds of judgments on what the quality of home broadband is if the majority of people are doing it on their phone over a Wi-Fi network. So we'll see how that works. This is from Investors Business Daily. Cable's broadband dominance faces threats from a host of issues. So I talked about how cable broadband is by far the most broadband, or dominant broadband, at least in the United States. Dominance in broadband services has buoyed Comcast stock and other cable TV firms for years, but now a host of issues, including President Biden's latest plan to fund municipal-backed broadband services, are making investors fret. So as I mentioned before, as these municipalities get into the business, that's a competitive threat to somebody like Comcast, who might also be serving that municipality. Now, one of the complaints from the municipalities often is that Comcast doesn't care about their citizens. So maybe they don't put in the investment to make the speeds as high as they should be, or to keep the prices as low as they should be. That's the reason why some of them are getting into business. Subscriber growth was expected to slow down this year as workers returned to offices and kids went back to school. So that's part of the reason that they're thinking that cable operators maybe might not be as profitable. One concern surrounds fixed 5G broadband service to homes now ramping up. And this is from people like Verizon and T-Mobile. But I don't expect 5G to replace wired broadband anytime soon. Some of these mid-band spectrums are interesting because they are faster than 4G service, and they can go a lot further than millimeter wave, but they're not faster than a lot of wired broadband services. So, for people to quit and sign up with a 5G service, they're going to need an incentive, which means it's going to have to be a lower price or something significant to make them to cut their broadband cord from their cable provider. The second worry is the expansion of fiber to the home broadband services by AT&T and other phone companies. But a lot of those expansions by AT&T and other companies tend to be in areas that are not as well served right now. So you're not going to see, I don't think, as much of that. You'll see that you've already got fiber, for example, here in the Atlanta area. You've got Comcast, you've got Xfinity service, broadband, and then you've got AT&T fiber. So they're already competing here. And I don't know how much additional competition there'll be with AT&T and other areas. There's also Elon Musk's SpaceX, and I also do not expect that to be a threat to cable providers' broadband service, because why would you go get Elon Musk's satellite service if you've already got a good wired connection in your home? The only reason would be if it would be significantly less expensive, and that's probably not going to be the case unless he sells at a loss, because the terminals that you get, the phased array antenna, is very expensive, and it's expensive all those satellites up in space. So that service is really more targeted at rural areas, and really very rural areas that don't have good service at all. Like maybe they have DSL, or they have old satellite, geostationary satellite, where the latency is really bad. So I don't expect SpaceX to be a threat either to cable companies. Again, cable TV firms dominate broadband. That's been the case. In 2020, U.S. cable TV firms added 4.82 million broadband subscribers, while phone companies added, and this number is totally wrong. It says 8,535. That's wrong. I don't know where they got that. According to this research, but we'll see here in a minute what the actual number is. It's 40,000. Cable TV firms ended 2020 with 72.8 million broadband customers versus 32.9 million at phone companies. So you can see there that there are twice as many cable TV broadband subscribers as phone subscribers. Again, looking at that research that they're referencing here, you can see the numbers. You've got broadband providers, the subscribers at the end of fourth quarter, and then net adds. So for cable companies, they had 72 million and their net adds 4.8 million. And then here it is for wireline phone companies. They have 32, really 33 million, and they added about 40,000 subscribers. They may have gotten that, it was close to this number. That 8,000 number may have come, this was from a phone company called Consolidated, so maybe somebody misinterpreted that number. So you can see a big difference there, although there will be more. We'll see greater gains from phone companies, especially due to the RDOF funds. That's the Rural Development Opportunity Fund, where the federal government provided a lot of funds for that, and a lot of that has gone to telephone companies, as well as satellite companies. So we'll see some uptick on the phone company and the satellite side from that. There is some success in the cable world. I mentioned that cable, you generally have had a higher download speed and lower upload speeds. That's just the way the technology has been, and that's been okay because generally people have been, for most of broadband, have been downloading a lot more stuff than they've been uploading. But full duplex is nice. It's nice to have the same speeds, and the cable labs have been putting forward changes to be able to make full duplex a possibility and a capability, and that's now been tested and trialed by Comcast, and they got 4 gig symmetrical speeds up and down doing that. Comcast said recent lab trials powered by a new system on chip, SoC from Broadcom, delivered symmetrical speeds of more than 4 gigabits per second. That technical achievement also puts Comcast and possibly other cable operators a step closer to DOCSIS 4.0, a new cable lab specification that will be capable of delivering up to 10 gigabits per second downstream and about 6 gigabits per second upstream. And then really they're looking at, mentions here also 10G. Their goal is to 10G, which is 10 gigabits per second, both up and down. And 4.0 is kind of part of that. FDX, or full duplex, is a technology with roots going back to DOCSIS 3.1. It allows cable operators to run both upstream and downstream traffic simultaneously in the same block of spectrum using echo cancellation. So the way cable, your standard QAM channels have traditionally worked is you had one section of spectrum specifically downstream, and then you had a smaller spectrum or section of spectrum for upstream. And now they're looking at taking that and putting it all in the same spectrum, back and forth, full duplex. So that is something that's coming. And I actually did a Tech Tuesday on 10G, kind of encompassing DOCSIS 4.0 a while ago. So I'll go ahead and link to that. I'll probably put a little, would be this corner? Yeah. I'll put a little pop-up right here as well to that video. It's very interesting on what's coming with DOCSIS. And this is one of the things, one of the important things that's coming with DOCSIS is this full duplex technology. So this will help them compete with fiber operators, because fiber is full duplex. So as you see more and more fiber going out there, cable needs to react to that if they want to maintain that lead that they have. Then finally, we want to talk a little bit about satellite. LEO, that's low Earth orbit satellite broadband forecast, over 5 million subscribers by 2026. So that's significant. An ABI research LEO satellite broadband forecast calls for considerable growth for the technology, while GEOs, or geosatellites, that's geosynchronous Earth orbit satellites, offer speeds faster than 100 megabits per second. Their distance from Earth, 36,000 kilometers, pushes latency to 600 milliseconds. So that's a really long latency. It's not, people are not happy when things are taking 600 milliseconds to get to and from their internet connection. SpaceX launched last year and so far has put more than 1,000 satellites in orbit. Plans call for it to serve more than 600,000 homes and businesses in the US. So they're already doing, SpaceX is already doing trials, demos, beta tests, I guess, here in the United States and in England. and people are very happy with the service, the speeds that they're getting. SpaceX also won $88.5 million to serve 642,000 locations in 35 states from that RDOF auction that I was talking about. So they don't have to go out and build fiber to these unserved areas. All they have to do is make sure that they've got satellites up there, and then they can provide service wherever you can point to one of these satellites. And it's not just like pointing at a geostationary satellite. These are constellations of satellites, so they're easier to hit. You don't have as much issues with aiming. ABI believes the market will reach 3.5 million subscribers this year, and with compound annual growth up to 5.2 million in 2026. Amazon is also getting into this. They pledged $10 billion for their Kuiper project. They're going to have far fewer satellites, 3,236 non-geostationary orbit satellites. They may not be as low Earth orbit as SpaceX is doing, because I know OneWeb is doing something like that, I believe, too, where their satellites are higher, so their latency is going to be higher, but they won't be quite as low, and they won't need maybe quite as many satellites. They're saying all the U.S. will be in its footprint, with the exception of some areas of Alaska. Amazon has not yet confirmed a launch date for its first satellite, so that's a big factor. So SpaceX already has 1,000 satellites up, and they've already got customers trying the service, and they will be rolling that out this year to real customers, real paying customers. So Amazon is quite a bit behind there. Orbiting around 800 to 1,600 kilometers from Earth's surface, low Earth orbit systems offer a major advantage of low latency, between 30 to 50 milliseconds. Compare that to, what was it, 600, I forget what it said, but it's like 600 milliseconds, I think. So again, Amazon is getting in that ballpark there. They're going to play there, and it says here that they finally landed somebody to launch their satellites, and that's another advantage that SpaceX has, is that's Elon Musk's, I shouldn't say SpaceX, I should say Starlink. So Starlink is the internet service, and of course SpaceX is the company that makes the rockets. So it's all one big happy family. They've got the rockets, they're creating the satellites for the broadband, whereas Amazon is just creating the satellites. So they needed somebody to launch all this stuff for them. So they have secured somebody to do that, and that's United Launch Alliance. They're going to provide Atlas 5 rockets for 9 launches, helping Amazon get its Project Kuiper off the ground. Again, here it mentions 10 billion and 500 employees to chase Starlink. Company received permission last July from the FCC to go ahead with the network, but the FCC license also set the clock ticking, saying Amazon must deploy half the constellation by July 2026. They should have time to do that if they can get this technology going. In December, Amazon announced it had finished initial development of the antenna in its customer terminal. They're going to be using the Ka band, which they're saying is delivering, or could deliver, 400 megabits per second, compared with Starlink's current 100 megabits per second. Now, Starlink is planning on doing, I believe they're planning on doing Ka band as well, but they wanted to roll this out more quickly, and they had an antenna that could do, I think maybe it's Ku band or something else that's like 12 gigahertz. So they rolled that out sooner, and they're getting decent speeds, over 100 megabits per second actually. But they do plan, I believe, on refining their antenna technology and offering in the Ka band to get higher speeds. Amazon also hasn't said if it will be selling subscriptions directly to consumers like Elon Musk's Starlink, or onto local networks and providers like OneWeb. OneWeb, which is, I believe, up in Canada, has not really been promoting this as something that would go direct to the subscriber. They're looking at more as transport, helping other providers, not so much direct to consumers. This is funny. One NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory engineer quipped on Twitter, they named it Project Kuiper, like the Kuiper Belt. Like uncountably many tiny objects cluttering space. How frustrating and close to self-awareness. And that is that's one of the things that people complain about these, especially with Starlink, that's going to have so many of these satellites up there, is that they clutter space. You know, if you were trying to look at space through a telescope, you've got these things flying over all the time. It's just going to be a lot of space junk up there possibly, so that's one of the dings against this technology. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. If so, give it a thumbs up. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Just on YouTube, click the subscribe button, or there's a little logo down the bottom. You can click to subscribe. When you subscribe, make sure you click the little bell, and you will be notified anytime live. I am live, and I'm live once a week, every Tuesday for Tech Tuesday. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.